Welcome to our lunchtime webinar on the topic of artificial intelligence. You should be seeing on your screen today a presentation which says OpenAI and ChatGPT, the legal concerns in the workplace. If you're not seeing that, please just pop in a message in the chat, or if you're not hearing this properly, we'll do what we can to try and fix it. But welcome to our presentation. I'm just letting a few more participants in. It comes in little bits of waves. I'm Sarah Capello and I'm a partner here at Hunt & Hunt Lawyers, and we're very excited to be talking about this topic today. Before we get into it, I wanted to make my position on AI clear. So we're not here today to do the typical lawyer thing and tell you why you should not use AI in your business. I'm a supporter of technology and innovation. The object today is to just highlight a few risks areas and to tell you how these can be managed. So I'm sure everyone here has the same views, and I'm not going to be the one that's going to crush those dreams. Some quick housekeeping rules. This webinar is being recorded. We will send around a link to the recording as well as the slides in the next few days. You're welcome to ask any questions in the question box, which you should see in your toolbar. We might answer relevant questions throughout the session, but if not, then we'll be waiting until the end to answer any questions in the designated question time. So a quick insight into Hunt & Hunt before we begin. Hunt & Hunt is a full-service national firm. We also have an international presence through our membership with Interlaw. And our motto is genuine people, practical solutions. And we like to set ourselves apart by taking the time to listen and truly understand the needs of our clients. So we recognise the need of our client in embracing AI. And we want to work with them while also providing the necessary advice and protections. Joining me today, I have Tyrone Walker, who is the head of IP in our Sydney office. Tyrone is a leading expert in IP and trademarks and has established an international practice. You might recognise Ty from his recent webinars he's presented in the past few months. He's been very busy. If you've missed them, let me know and we can send you the recording. But hi, Ty, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
We also have a special guest here, Evan Marquardt, who is the owner of Motive IT. Evan is joining us as our technology partner, and he'll be telling us a little bit about what AI is and how it can be used and operated within the business. So thanks for joining us, Evan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. As mentioned, I'm the owner of Motive IT. We're a Sydney-based managed services provider and focused on helping people make the most out of their technology experience. We're the trusted provider to help with strategic planning for businesses to make the most out of their opportunities, such as using AI. So thank you.
So we've broken the session up today into 4 different sections. Evan will be talking first about what AI is and then how it can be used in your business. Tyrone and I will then be talking about the risk factors and how to manage those risks, specifically in an employment setting. We will also be giving some case examples to see how you can maybe apply them and how you can apply methods to try and manage those risks. And as I said earlier, the message is not going to be why you should not engage in AI and technology because of those risks, but more importantly, how you can recognise ways to manage the exposure. So handing over to Evan, tell us, what is AI?
That's right. So what is AI? Where is the trend and why should we care? So AI is artificial intelligence. It's changing the way that we traditionally have used computing. It's no longer following a specific set of rules. Rather, it is actually creating the rules. By giving AI access to the right information, the model to create the rules and connect data points, it can give us the answers and the output. Often it's able to do this much faster and more efficiently than humans are able to do. So AI is considered the next big step in the technology space. Previously, over the last couple of decades, you would have seen a huge move from new on-premise technology, computers, servers coming to business, and then a phase going to cloud computing, as I'm sure a lot of you use Microsoft 365. And now we're seeing this shift to AI. Whether we like it or not, AI is going to become a large part of our day-to-day working life. So ChatGPT is one of the most well-known platforms for providing an AI service. Given the recent investment of Microsoft in this platform of around $10 billion, we'll be seeing an extreme growth and adoption of this program. So even if you're not using this program directly at the moment, rest assured you'll see it starting to be accessible within common applications that you use, such as Microsoft programs, Google, and even the software that we use to design this presentation today, Canva. So it's developed using different techniques and approaches to make computers smarter and more capable. So you may be wondering, how has AI grown to where it is and to continue and grow and become more capable? Typically, we're seeing machine learning AI growth coming from three main areas. So to start it out, it comes from supervised learning. So as you can imagine, as a baseline, we're giving it a predetermined set of data, making sure that it can, in a guided fashion, connects that data, create its rules, and give the expected output that we want it to actually see. Then we move it into unsupervised, so letting it have raw data and connect and create those rules without any guidance and make sure that it can still come with the same output. Then we see reinforcement learning, and this is where ChatGPT really comes into play. And that's where we're seeing end users such as us testing the machine learning and giving it feedback to let it know, is it correct or is it wrong? And it is able to update essentially its own database and make sure that it's accurate moving forward. So one of the problems that we'll start to see here is it's only as good as the data that we put into it at this point. Services such as ChatGPT is a public database, and there's no controls over the type of information that people are able to submit to these machines. Therefore, that can cause the data to be inaccurate that comes back out.
In the context of preparing this presentation, I've been talking to some colleagues and friends, and I've noticed that when I talk about AI, there really is the assumption that we're talking about ChatGPT, but there's so much more to it, isn't it?
That's exactly right. And there are a lot of places where we're probably already using AI and we may not even know it yet. I'm sure a lot of you in this audience are using a Google Home. Google was smart enough to give out a lot of Google Homes over the last couple of years and have it infecting our homes. Google have recently come out with their own AI engine. And as Tyrone and I were speaking just before this, it's able to help us make bookings on our behalf. It's able to truly deliver a smart home, which is a bit of a scary thought at the moment to have it constantly following us. But we're going to start to see that really trend into our mobile phones and really impacts the way that we live our daily lives. I'm sure a lot of the business... Oh, sorry, yeah, you go, Tyrone.
No, and it's being used in a whole bunch of different sectors already. Just to kind of give a couple of examples in the healthcare sector, AI is transforming patient care, diagnosis, and drug discovery. It's AI is analyzing medical data to detect diseases. It's used to predict patient outcomes and even provide personalized treatment recommendations. In the financial sector, it's being used already for fraud detection, risk assessment, for trading, and obviously in customer service. In the retail industry, it's been used for personalized shopping experience, demand forecasting, inventory management, chatbot customer services on their websites. And, e-commerce giants like Amazon are trying to use AI for customer preferences, driving up their sales and obviously in the satisfaction. Even in the legal industry, law firms are using AI to look at, obviously analyze different contracts and use it in legal research. And there's going to be pitfalls to this, and we're going to point it out a little bit later. But just in everyday kind of use, even in our word chatting, there's a good example that's been on YouTube at the moment where Google's AI, an individual used it to book a meeting or a dinner reservation for him and his wife at a restaurant and said, please, can you book me at this restaurant at 7 p.m. on Tuesday? And the Google AI actually phoned the restaurant and made the booking and then sent him an email confirmation afterwards. And even in the entertainment industry, actors and performing artists are starting to recognize AI. Tom Hanks recently said in an interview that, even after he passes away, they might still use his image and voice for the next 100 years or indefinitely, if people actually want to watch a movie with him. And David Guetta just recently released a song, not for commercial purposes, but just for fun. And he used 2 AI programs to integrate Eminem and his rapping into a dance song without Eminem's permission. But it was just a clear example how even the music industry They don't have to create the music lyrics themselves anymore. They can just use AI to create the lyrics.
Some scary thoughts there. So how is AI being used within your organization? And yeah, there's some common things there on the screen already, but one thing to consider when we think of the company that adopts and embraces AI versus the company that does not adopt AI. So obviously in the current business climate, we're having to be a lot more creative in how we can reduce our expenses and maximize our productivity and efficiency of our team. So AI really speaks to this and therefore is a really great opportunity for our teams. As mentioned, ChatGPT is one of the most well-known platforms for doing this. Content creation is one of the greatest use cases for recruitment, proposals, agreements, as we've listed there on the website content. And it helps create the framework for many of these activities. So requiring only the background knowledge for accuracy checking. So what's really smart that Microsoft are doing at the moment, I know I talk a lot about Microsoft, but they really are at the front of what they're doing here, is they're recognizing that businesses want to adopt these various services in their own bespoke way. So they're building the product offering which allows people to build their own bespoke AI use cases, and they can give the tools to do so. So this allows businesses to build and deliver at a fraction of the cost. Things around analytics, trends of their customers and internal business units with Power BI, applications for processes which don't currently exist with their Power Apps, chatbots that you'll probably be seeing on websites already and virtual agents are now starting to get AI built into their backend. What we've seen is Land Rover, for instance, were a really great use case where they were able to build over 100 apps to automate their processes and connect to their systems and simplify the reporting of their company. So each industry has its own way of being able to leverage this AI technology, and it's really only limited by what we can think to do with it. So the organization is able to increase their output and embrace AI will be able to see considerable cost-saving advantages, whereas the business that doesn't will start to feel increased pressure and difficulty in maintaining competitiveness in the marketplace. But ultimately, though, I do want everyone to consider at this point that if all of us are using AI, where is the differentiation from your service to the next business? Whilst you're able to do the job and AI tools are fantastic, businesses are now having to position themselves more as an advisory service and leveraging the relationships to ensure the loyalty and the service differentiation.
So the legal concerns with AI. So we're not trying to say everything is doom and gloom with the use of AI. All organizations are going to have to adopt AI in some form. But we just kind of wanted to point out the legal concerns with AI, and we've listed some of the elements or factors in those bullet points there, which we'll be briefly discussing. There's various legal issues that's going to come up with AI within your organization, and obviously Hunt and Hunt are there to support you through these issues. Some of the questions, who is responsible if something goes wrong in your organization? How do you actually protect people's privacy in your organization? How do you actually handle the data properly? Is there a breach, or how are you handling confidential information and the intellectual property within your organization? And will you be liable if there is a breach or a release of confidential information or IP? And Sarah will be discussing, obviously, the employment issues around AI and how it impacts the employees and the employment law and compliance within your organization. The first issue is obviously privacy.
Sorry, has Tyrone just cut out there?
Yeah, it does look like he's cut out. We'll just give him a
Into
second.
these systems.
In
order for the system to actually, in order to train the AI and get an output from the AI, you need to input information. And the problem with that is that you might be inputting information that's sensitive or personal, or actually not your information, and it's data from a third party. We've all heard in the news recently, the Optus data breach. And these are just some examples. If you breach the privacy laws within the country, organizations can face up to a $50 million fine at the moment. Individuals can face fines up to $2.5 million. So what we're trying to say is, we're here to help you. If you do not have a privacy policy in place or unsure about the data that you have, contact us, and we can obviously implement different policies and procedures to help you make sure that you are compliant. A few kind of examples of information that you could be concerned about is obviously employee information, supplier names. If you're a healthcare company, medical information, the patient names. It can be something like attendance registers or email addresses or telephone numbers. If you're in the financial industry, the financial information of your customers. This all forms part of personal data that you're currently storing within your organization, and there needs to be compliance and measures in place.
So Tyrone, you cut out, I think, a little bit at the start, but if you're watching this for the audience and you missed a little bit of the start, just pop in a question or in the chat, and Tyrone can answer the questions later on. You froze a little bit, Tyrone, when you...
No worries.
I think you're right now. We can hear you again.
Well, that's a good thing. Obviously, using AI and the likes of ChatGPT, there might be issues around discrimination. Once again, the information that you're inputting is going to be key and vital to the information that kind of gets spat out the end or used, I've got kind of a few examples of discriminating outputs or responses. In the financial industry, financial institutions, the lending practices or the loans that they provide, AI is currently being used for credit scoring models, and they might deny a loan to a certain group of individuals based on their racial or socioeconomic backgrounds. So that's going to be an issue. In online advertisements or in the advertising industry, there might be targeted advertising based on the input or the information that's put into the AI, based on factors such as gender, race, or age. We'll chat a little bit later about even in the recruitment within your organization, you could put in a few examples of employees that you would like within your organization, but depending on the age, the race, the sex, on those template CVs or template individuals that you put into the system, you're going to get different responses or different candidates for that position. Confidentiality is obviously a major issue. The confidentiality is obviously throughout your organization, and that can be from the employment agreements that you sign, from the third-party supply agreements, client agreements. This is all sensitive information that needs to be safeguarded within your organization. And you might not even realize it, but employees are using your information within the organization already. ChatGPT is so freely available, on your web browser, and they might be inputting some of this information into an AI program like ChatGPT, and they might not be knowing that they're actually breaching confidential information, which is an issue. And that might raise things like liability or breach of contract, breach of privacy laws. So there's a whole lot of repercussions in there, in your organization at the moment that you might not even realize that's actually happening.
And that's where your technology provider will be working with you to actually make sure there's a policy in place to restrict people from being able to access certain sites if that's something that your company does not want them to be able to do. So it's important to make sure that, as Tyrone says, make sure there's alignment between your different providers so that you can achieve a common goal there. Yeah.
And jumping through to liability, obviously, if there's a breach of confidentiality or a breach of IP clause in an agreement, the organization might be liable. There might be a breach of contract to a supplier or a third party, a breach of employment agreement, and these have all repercussions. That could lead to financial losses within the company or a breach of fiduciary duty of a director. And these are all issues that we kind of need to safeguard in terms of the policies and procedures and legal mechanisms that we can help you with. Obviously, from a breach of fiduciary duty, directors have got a duty to have a look at the actual AI technology that's being implemented. There needs to be supervision and oversight. Make sure the risks and limitations are minimized. That there's not a conflict of interest that comes out of the use of the AI. That there's not disclosure of this confidential information, or of even IP that's been developed within the organization, or the use of a third-party IP or patent or trademark.
Thanks for that, Tyrone. So I'm going to take what Tyrone has discussed and some of the issues and expand upon them and talk about them specifically in the workplace context. And I'll also be giving a couple of examples about how some risks have actually unfolded in other organisations. So the first is the data protection, and that's what Tyrone talked about in terms of the privacy. So this is there's twofold for this. Is firstly ensuring that you're not disclosing your employees' information, and also that they're not actually disclosing any information as well. So this is where you want to make sure you're compliant at all times with the Privacy Act, and Tyrone will be talking later on about privacy policies. AI used in the recruitment and management of employee space. So sorry, there's a typo I can see on the screen there with the A. But some of the algorithms have been proven to be biased and discriminatory to certain categories of individuals. There's an example where Amazon had created creating a program. They had engaged a bunch of engineers to create a recruitment program, which would then allow them to take a mass amount of resumes and then spit out a bunch of ideal candidates that they could fulfill certain positions with. They ultimately never rolled the program out because they discovered that it actually had a bias against women. And they showed this is because a lot of the candidates typically in that space were male candidates, but they could prove that the system taught itself to exclude women from putting forward possible female candidates. So they obviously didn't roll that out. Another area that I had identified as a potential risk area, and this is one I was talking to my colleague about, was the classification of employees under awards. So this is when you're giving employees tasks to do that requires them to use AI and they're getting some output from AI. How are they going to be classified? So if they're upskilling, are they going to increase the classification under award? Awards typically look at a bunch of different categories in terms of how you then classify them. So this might be qualifications, experience, and then also skill. So in the skill aspect, if they're going to be upskilling and they're going to be using AI to help them increase their output, are they going to fall in a different classification? Are you going to be exposed to an underpayment claim? These are the kind of things you need to think about. In the duties and performance realm, so you need to make sure firstly that you've got HR policies and also your employment contracts talk about the rules of the use of AI in your workplace. So there's that aspect to make sure that it's clearly communicated to the employees what the rule of the workplace is about the use of AI. And I'll be talking about an example later on about a workplace that's banned it. Then also exercising caution when you're actually using AI such as ChatGPT to generate these policies. Now, this might sound a bit like of an upsell, but I can tell you it's not. When you put in these the information to generate these policies, you're ultimately going to be getting a generic policy that might not be applicable to your workplace, and it becomes essentially obsolete. If you're seeking to rely upon this policy, which is generic in the management of employees, such as looking to sack an employee because they haven't complied with this policy and it doesn't actually reflect the workplace, you're going to have some difficulties there. So when you're getting a bespoke and customized policy, not only are you getting something that's created for the workplace, but also we're going to be giving you advice about how this is going to be implemented. And that's different from the AI, what is being generated based upon a bunch of different data. And this leads then to that next point of the disciplinary actions, and then arising from employee misuse, and also in the context of then asking for advice about whether you have grounds for dismissal or not. So firstly, in the misuse aspect, is an employee misusing AI? Is that going to be grounds for dismissal? The answer to that is it depends upon what your rules about AI in the workplace has been and whether they're properly communicated to the workforce. So these are some things you need to think about. There's obviously a solution to all of these things, but there's stuff that you have to consider when deciding upon the right policy for the workplace. Now, looking then from the angle of exposure of employees who use AI in the workplace, Tyrone had already mentioned the potential intellectual property infringement risks. Now, an example of this is the case of Samsung. So you might have heard about this in the media where it was reported that there was a leak. Sorry, that's my phone. Let me turn that off. It was reported that there was... Go away. Sorry if that's somebody calling. There was a Samsung leak where an employee had input code into the system, and that was a huge confidential leak and also a trade secret that had been put out in the public arena. Now, there's that aspect in terms of the potential breaches, that the damages can flow from the breaches, but in terms of then disciplining your employees for doing that, it really depended upon what the policy was in the workplace. Now, Samsung are reported to have then banned the use of AI in their organisation. So if an employee now does that after they've issued this direction, because of this huge exposure, then that would be grounds for then dismissal. The next point is the vicarious liability aspect. So this is where an employer is responsible for the actions of an employee. So there are some exceptions to this, but ultimately you need to make sure that your employees are making sure that they're compliant, so that as the business owner, that you're not going to be exposed to a claim, or the business isn't going to be exposed to a claim. So the exceptions to this is if the employee is acting in their own right rather than on their employer's instructions. And again, this comes back to why it's important to properly communicate to your workforce what your rules are about this. And if they then go ahead and engage in this themselves, then they're acting out of their instructions, and then there's a defence to that vicarious liability argument if need be. The origins of the work is actually quite an interesting one. So to me, what I recognise in this area as a risk is if you're representing to your customers and your clients that this is original work, then there's some potential exposures here. In particular, I put it in the context of professionals, such as lawyers and accountants, particularly time-based professionals like lawyers. We often charge on a time base, not always, but often charge on a time base. So if I produce a piece of advice and I represent to the client, represented through my issuing an invoice saying that it took me 2 hours, 4 hours, however long I said that it's taking to prepare this advice, but in actual fact it was generated by AI, that in my view is exposing you to a claim for misrepresentation. Now, obviously, the solution to might be in this is having a fixed price model so that it's not time costed, but you just need to be aware that how you're representing the work that you're actually doing. And I know Evan had some thoughts about this in the context of the universities as well.
Yeah, this is definitely a huge issue in the education space at the moment, purely from a plagiarism perspective. And, a lot of students have been able to actually have AI conduct a lot of their work and basically fumble their way through quite a few courses here. And so we're seeing quite an investment in that space to ensure that there's actually AI technology to detect work that is done by AI. And we're seeing that being rolled out at a few universities already, actually. So it'd be very interesting to see how that comes down to, other businesses and how we can use that commercially to maintain the quality of our work as well. So I can imagine that'll be something for Hunt and Hunt in the future.
Absolutely. I think it's just about being honest about who's preparing the work. Then that comes down also to the accuracy of the information. So there's a case I'll talk about in a moment, but also quickly, there was an instance in New York where a New York lawyer had handed up a brief to the judge, which had apparently presented quite well, referenced a bunch of cases, but it turned out that none of the cases were real cases. They were purely made up. So it is, I've read a lot of articles about how AI just potentially can create these authorities because it's actually just scouring a bunch of data and these authorities don't actually exist. So for people like lawyers or professionals that are relying upon information, they need to go back to the source and make sure that it's accurate. Another exposure is the reduction in protections that can flow from using third parties that you don't get, in my view, from AI. So this, again, coming back to the legal context, we have insurances in place that if somebody is acting negligently or they're not competent in giving the advice and it's the wrong advice, then there's professional negligence claims that can be made, and there's insurances that flow from that. And so by using AI and not actually going to that other organisation or that professional, then you're not having the benefit of that insurance in place if a loss arises. And we hope it doesn't come down to that, particularly for Hunt and Hunt. But as aside from that, there's also the legal professional privilege that can attach to advice. And here's an example where it might apply. I was, again, talking to my colleague about this, where if you're asking ChatGPT for advice about whether or not you should sack an employee based upon a certain characteristics or certain what they've done, for example, and it spits out recommendations based upon the information it's sourcing, and you pop that in the employee file or you share it with your other colleagues, then that is something that's going to be discoverable. If you go and get advice from a professional, it's covered by legal or professional privilege, and that's not something that's attached to anything outside of what's been given as legal advice. So there's these kind of things that need to be thought of. If it's something that you want to keep confidential and privileged, then don't use AI for that purpose. The reputational risk that can flow, this leads to the example that I'll be talking about now, where a university in America, you might have read about this case, where they issued a release. It was a media release about a mass shooting in another university. It was quite insensitively done, but essentially they'd asked AI to draft this media release, and they had done it. It was fine, but they had, number one, misrepresented the number of shootings that had occurred, so the information wasn't correct. There was an accuracy issue. But also the person who had prepared this had omitted disclaimer that comes out when you put in information to ChatGPT, and just essentially copied and pasted it. So it caused a bit of an uproar because it demonstrated the insensitivity of dealing with such an issue, which was about mass shootings in America, where someone had clearly cut and pasted a message. So it had an impact. It was a reputational risk to the organisation, and they were having to manage how that was going to be processed. The other example, which I talked about earlier, was Samsung. And as I mentioned, they've now issued, from what I've read, they've issued a ban on the use of AI because of that risk that exposed to them, that trade secret leak and that confidentiality leak that can flow from that. So you need to look at your organisation and whether there's any risks associated with you putting certain information in there. If the risks are too high, then you might want to consider the policy. Otherwise, you need to make sure you've got mechanisms in place to manage that, to ensure your employees aren't disclosing that information. Now, passing over to Tyrone, who's going to delve more into the IP aspect of it.
And for the users, well, anyone that's on the webinar that actually hasn't used ChatGPT, because I know a couple of people haven't, and they actually don't know what it is. I don't know if we actually described that pretty well in the beginning, but ChatGPT is basically a program or a website, and you can ask it anything. You can ask it to write you an essay about the modern era artist's impressions, or you can ask it to write you an apology letter, and that's what happened in that Vanderbilt University. And then, so it can literally do anything for you, but it's all up to the information or data that you input into the AI program. So if in the case of Samsung with the work employees there, the Samsung employee wanted to develop further code, source code, so it actually inputted what he wanted, the additional source code, but then released that current source code that they had into the system, which is not great, or into the AI. And that's the issue, So there's a couple of issues when you're inputting that information or data into an AI program like a ChatGPT. And the first issue, well, what information are you putting in there? Has that information been protected by copyright? It could be your organization's data that's protected by copyright or by some other form of IP. Or is it actually somebody else's IP or copyright that you're inputting into that system? So there could be an infringement from that perspective of actually inputting it into the program. And then also what else is generated from the AI program. So you obviously get data that comes out, and where does that data come from? So these are all the different kind of IP issues that are facing the world at the moment with ChatGPT and the AI. There's big questions on who owns the copyright or the IP that's inputted in, and obviously the information that comes out of it. And organizations could be infringing somebody else's copyright, because all the AI is doing, like a ChatGPT, is just scraping the internet, gathering information and compiling it for you and spitting it out. So that is the main issue. And you certainly don't want employees inputting confidential information, any kind of trade secret. There might be a non-disclosure in place with another organization. So that is the issue around the IP. And there's various organizations that have actually in lawsuits at the moment, or issued lawsuits. And a couple of examples, which will be on the next slide, is Microsoft, GitHub, and OpenAI are all currently being sued for copyright law. Getty Images obviously they've got a platform. If you don't know what Getty Images, there's a lot of websites out there or companies out there that have images on their website that third parties can utilize. There'll be licenses in place, and you'll pay a fee to actually use an image that is on their website. And in this case, Getty Images, the AI program was actually scraping the images out without the permission and using it by a third party. So they're currently being sued for copyright infringement. And the next slide, please, Sarah.
Thanks, Si. So we've developed a checklist of what you might be able to do in order to then kind of manage some of these risks. So first thing is to conduct regular audits to ensure that your AI systems are not exposing your business to any legal risks. This is such as the one that I talked about in the Amazon example with the recruitment program. The next is to provide training and education to employees on the risks of AI to make sure that they are properly informed. For example, you might show them a copy of this recording so that they can understand some of the kind of key points they need to look at. Or we can come in and we can do a one-on-one training sessions for a team. The third point is to look at your IP protections and establish guidelines on AI-generated work. So this will be dealt with in your contracts and also with your policies and also in the training sessions that you'll undertake in your workplace. Next, you want to create policies that deal with the business use of AI. So this would include protocols about how to handle situations where there is a breach and also the rules about how this is going to be governed. And last, you want to conduct regular reviews of all your agreements with vendors and suppliers to ensure that you're compliant and then properly protected.
Relevant legal instruments. So that kind of breaks down Sarah's points even further into more simple points. Privacy policies. If your organization or your business doesn't have a privacy policy in place, I would recommend getting in contact with us. You certainly don't want to be in breach of the privacy laws that they are at the moment. And jumping back to my previous slides, which I discussed, privacy information can include client names, employee names, their email addresses, age, sex, genders. It can include any information. It could be registrars at any kind of data or in registry that's signed in at the workplace. So all that information is protected. You need to adopt a privacy policy and then obviously have the policy in place if there is a breach, just to comply with the privacy laws. Employment agreements need to be updated. Any future employment agreement or employment policy needs to be updated, which includes use of AI or data in terms of the data breaches or privacy in terms of that data. Any further contracts that you enter into with third parties could be independent contractor agreements, supply agreements. Any agreement needs to have provisions placed regarding data, privacy, and the use of AI and technology going forward.
Thank you, Sarah and Tyrone. So they've already covered off quite a few good points there about how you can get started to make sure you're on top of this. But I wanted to just include a couple of things from an IT perspective, which are just some basic checklist items, really just to make sure you're starting on the right foot here. So in terms of understanding the type of data that's being entered, so to Tyrone's point, ensure it's not confidential or IP related, create a company policy surrounding this to ensure clarity, and then furthermore, create an IT policy around it as well. So ensure that AI systems that are being used are credible and maintain minimum cybersecurity systems and standards for data protection, such as Microsoft. So OpenAI being open source, there will be a lot of new vendors that will come out trying to leverage this technology, but how are they protecting all the data that they're collecting? So that's just something to consider there. Review any business requirements around IT compliance to ensure there is no breach for any cybersecurity frameworks, if you need to adhere to those, any other policies or accredited frameworks, such as ISO accreditations. Make sure that AI isn't going to impact that because typically they can be enforced by work providers and insurance providers and need to make sure that they can be upheld. Make sure your IT service provider can provide support and advisory around your implementation and usage of AI to manage this process. So as Sarah was talking about building a policy that talks about how they can use AI in the workplace, and if they can't, make sure your technology policy says the same thing. So rather than having the risk that they will use it anyway, leverage the IT provider to actually come in and restrict what they can and can't do, so the risk is eliminated altogether. And conduct regular reviews on the usage and changes to AI to ensure your business doesn't become negatively affected in the future. So as we see new systems come into play, new vendors come into play, and AI changes how it works and collects data, we just want to make sure that your business doesn't then fall susceptible to any of the negative impacts there. Thank you.
So now we're up to questions. So we haven't had any questions in the live session, but we have had a bunch been submitted prior. So I'll read them out. I'm sorry, Tyrone and Evan, I forgot to share these with you earlier. But the first one is, should we build a policy regarding AI and ChatGPT usage?
So I think we've answered that in the presentation. You should definitely have a policy in place. A good example, and not to ban it straight out, Samsung have banned the use of ChatGPT after this incident that they've had. But it can definitely be beneficial to your organization, and Evan will probably have a whole lot of other AI programs that can be utilized. It can be beneficial. Once again, we just got to be a bit careful on the use of it. And there needs to be policies in place, you know, in order to, if there is an employment issue going forward, you know, Sarah will obviously deal with that, but that the policy is in place that can be relied upon if there is some kind of issue or negligence that's used from it.
Thanks, Ty. So if you've got any questions, then please pop them into the chat. You should see the toolbar, which is on top of your screen, or sometimes it's below your screen, but pop them in and we'll do our best to answer. We've got plenty of time now to answer them, but if not, we'll go through the ones that have been already submitted. So we have one here, Tyrone, I think this is the one's for you. It's interested in understanding the privacy law implications of putting de-identified health information into OpenAI API. Currently, their servers are located in the USA.
Anything around health information, you've got to be very careful. You know, the privacy laws specifically deal with health service providers, and that they need to have privacy policies in place. I would need to just have a kind of look at that information and then specifically look at it before I kind of give you advice on that. And you're welcome to pop me an email with it. But, you know, the privacy laws specifically say you've got to be very cautious with health information, patient information, and obviously where that information is stored. And it needs to clearly state in your policy that if it is going to be stored or used by a third party, especially in other territories, it's got to be stated there in the privacy policy. So I'll just be careful with that. And then if you, as a health service provider, you definitely need to have a policy in place. And we're helping a number of doctors at the moment and different medical institutions with their privacy policy, or just updating it. It needs to be updated. Have a look at it on a yearly basis at least.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, Tyrone. I was going to say that you definitely start to run into some data sovereignty issues around where the storage of that data is, geographically, to make sure that it stays within this region, depending on what it is being stored. But yeah, in that health space, that is definitely a large issue. And
who has access to that information too, you've got to be concerned about. So definitely, even if you don't have a privacy policy in place, get in touch with us, but have a look at it from an employment aspect too.
So the next question is got a little bit of a legal angle, but I think, Evan, you might be able to answer this as well. But when and if could AI, and in what circumstances, replace human lead legal advice interactions? Low and not complex issues, yes, but complex issues. So this is, I guess, when should you be taking, well, this is how I interpret it, when should you be taking legal advice from AI?
Maybe we both can answer this.
I've got my thoughts, but I'll reserve them until you guys answer it.
Look, I think this is probably a bit of a trend that we've already talked about here, but the output that you will get from AI is only ever going to be as good as the input that you put into it. So if you don't fully understand the context or how to position the question, AI is never going to be able to give you the right exact answer, which Sarah did touch on one of those slides. The benefit of having a law firm like Hunt & Hunt work with you is they understand the context of your situation and the ramifications around it, and therefore they know the right question that they're asking, and so they can give you the right output. I would never say be solely dependent on AI, especially when it comes to legal matters. You'd rather have it accompany the right legal advice, such as Sarah, for example.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer, and I agree with that. Obviously, I think we're better than AI. I think we're better than AI. But ultimately, I'm not opposed to then asking these questions, because then sometimes it will then allow you to ask even more questions, have a greater understanding. But as Evan said just now, you should never rely upon it solely for the advice that you want to be getting, because of the reasons I mentioned earlier in terms of the protections, the liability, the insurances you get by actually going to professional. But ultimately, use it as a tool. Use it as a tool to know what questions you need to ask your lawyer, or whether you're going down the right path, or what are other businesses getting, what information are they getting as well, and then use that to then get the customized advice that you're getting from your lawyer. So by all means, I'm not saying don't use it, but just use it with these other parameters of making sure you're getting it qualified.
Yeah, that's right. And that's what we're starting to refer to as the co-pilot. So it's not the main driver, it's in the back seat, giving you recommendations and ideas and helping answer some of those questions and pointing you in the right direction. So think of it as your co-pilot when you're trying to delve into these new issues, but don't think of it as the single source of truth around what you're trying to achieve.
I think I can kind of got 2 points on it. One is the New York lawyer that relied upon the AI to provide his whole legal document that he submitted to court, and it was completely fictitious. Yeah. So that shows you right there. And the second thing is, you don't know what information it's scraping. That's the only issue with the AI at the moment. It's scraping information from the internet, and that could be scraping from some social media website where a whole bunch of individuals have chatted about a legal issue, and it could be obtaining the information from the answers there from unqualified people. So you don't know that data and how accurate that data is. So always just ask us. Is the basic line. If there is a legal issue, like Sarah says, you can obviously input that information into ChatGPT and see what it says. But the one good thing about ChatGPT at the bottom is it always says consult a lawyer. Certainly the information is not completely accurate, and there's limitations, like a ChatGPT, I think it's limited to information that it scrapes from the internet from 2021. So it's not the most up-to-date as well. So there might be new updates in law. It certainly can't scrape cases that well, case law that well. So that's certainly not going to help in any case, because there might be new updates in the law.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a really interesting question here from an anonymous attendee. My workplace currently does not have an AI ChatGPT policy. If I use ChatGPT to create a letter or report, should I disclose this to my manager? What do you think, guys? I'm happy to answer this, but I would like to know your thoughts too.
Sarah's the expert, but I would disclose this first. Number one, you've got to be very careful in the information. Like, again, it goes back down to the IP. You don't know where that information is being scraped from. So it might be inaccurate. Obviously, it's the user that has to look at it at the end of the employee and agree with it. But it might be protected by copyright, which even the employer might not know about. It just depends on what is in the letter and what is in the essay. Especially like we spoke about earlier with the academic institutions, they're going to have a nightmare controlling this unless there is AI programs that audit the information. Employers, they're not going to have that AI program to look over every email that's sent as well. So that's the issue there.
I absolutely would disclose it, because for a couple of reasons. Firstly, you don't want to be representing certain work being done on your own, so creating your own work, but it's actually somebody else doing it. But also then, in terms of that vicarious liability that I talked about, that is a protection that can be offered to employees. But if you're going out on a bit of a frolic on your own, which is contrary to the policies at the workplace, then you're not going to have that protection. So from an employee perspective, absolutely disclose it. Speak to your manager about it. It might be that they're wanting to know a little bit more about how to use it, but they're not sure. So you could be the one that's initiating that conversation and getting that policy in place. So my answer is, yeah, I absolutely would. Also because of these other risks that you don't want to expose the business to, because if you sometimes then, if you're exposing to, like in that Samsung case, that leak, that confidential leak, then that potentially could be grounds for dismissal. So you don't want to put your job at jeopardy here.
And that's why organizations should have a policy in place, and we're happy to come and do some training to organizations on the use of of AI and ChatGPT, just to kind of point out the concerns, because employees don't actually know about the concerns. They're just entering the information, they're typing it away, and they don't actually realize they might be breaching some kind of privacy law. They might be infringing copyright, there might be negligence, penalties, damages to the organization.
This is one probably from Evan, although Tyrone, you're very knowledgeable about this too, but when Midjourney creates images of humans, are the images AI generated or are the images scraped from the internet? I have no idea. So it's not.
It would be a mixture of both. It would be leveraging existing pictures of humans and that think of them as data points, and that's a reference point for them, and then creating the rule around it. So it really is leveraging data, creating its own rules, and with AI developing what it believes should be the output. So in that instance, both.
That opens up a whole other aspect of IP law. In different countries, there's personality and dignity rights. In Australia, it's a little bit less limited, but in other territories around the world, you can't just scrape somebody's image or create it on AI and utilize that, depending where you're utilizing it, number one. But of Trump dancing on something, you can't just have that. You can't just input somebody's image and utilize it in advertisements. I've acted for a lot of international companies where they've utilized AI or somebody or personality or an image of somebody without their authorization, but they said, well, I got this off the internet, or AI created this, it should be freely used. Well, no, it's not. You can't just use somebody's image and use it for commercial gain.
It's very common that happens. All right, so we might wrap up because we're getting to the end of our session, but thank you so much for joining us today. I really hope that you're going to take away a lot of information about this and hopefully then be able to then adopt this technology, but do it in a really controlled way. Thank you very much to Tyrone and Evan for joining us here today to talk about AI. It's a really interesting topic, and I'm sure we're going to get a heap more questions come through. So please do reach out to us if you have those questions. Our phone numbers are there, or you can send us an email. I've also got Evan's details. If you've got any IT questions, you can shoot his way. But we love it. We love a chat. Tyrone and I in particular really love a chat. So give us a call. We'll talk your ear off.
That's it.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. And there's a couple more questions that have come through at the last minute, but we'll reach out to you separately just to have a chat about that. But everyone, hope you have a lovely day. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.